I faced long and difficult odds growing up in America. Had a background of impoverishment and difficulties, and yet I emerged out of all of that better and not bitter. I had the fortunate experience some years later of running for the presidency twice. One thing you learn is that you learn to share, but mostly to hear and to listen. And in these days and times, we hear voices. Walls are coming down in Berlin, and there are voices behind those walls. Elections in Namibia, mass rallies in South Africa, elections across this country, voices. Paper workers in Maine, women fighting for the rights of self-determination, the children fighting for children's rights, the basic rights to be heard. And so in this program, you're going to see farmers and workers and women and children as we share this global village with you and share with you Voices of America. This week, we had the good experience of being with a friend of ours whose voice we hear all of the time, but not this side of his voice. No one is successful because they're lucky, but because they really do plan it. We hear Bill Cosby. To talk with Bill about growing up in a housing project in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the gap between growing up in that housing project and whoever he is today, and it is a gap. Let's hear the voice, the other voice, if you will, of Bill Cosby.
What happened was I really woke up in the service because I was still playing when I went in to join the Navy and see the world and have a good time. See, I left the academic world and got into a world where discipline, you have to be, you better. And the people telling me these things, I felt were not as bright as I. And I felt that I had missed the point. But I got it right away when I got into the service. And so for 4 years, I went into physical therapy school. I worked with patients. And my whole drive was to get out of the service and get an education, because I knew that once I got out of the service, if I didn't have a college education, I would be at Horn and Hardart busting tables. Nothing wrong with it, but I would be doing jobs to get a salary, to pay my rent, to buy a car, and none of these things really happened to be what I wanted to.
But you're not successful, therefore, because you're lucky or soulful.
No. This is all planned.
There's a sense when you watch the television, you see the successful Bill Cosby, family man, father of the country, TV personality, and somewhere between luck and soul, here comes Bill Cosby.
Right.
And your point is there's a work factor in that situation, a work ethic.
Well, certainly it is, but you know, in show business, unless you're on a certain level that the media considers the intellectual level, they would never write about it. They're not interested in it. I don't know how many times I've brought writers for magazines into the studio, and I've said to them, now this is what we're doing and this is what we're consciously working on. And they said, well, was your father an alcoholic? I said, no, that's not important. This is how we get this script together, and this is how we're consciously making this approach in terms of a person's behavior.
Do they ever write about your academic pursuits as a fact in your development?
No, that's not interesting to them. And it isn't just racial. It has to do with what the media dislikes and likes about entertainers. They'd rather talk about how many cars a person owns as opposed to how you got to a successful television series. What is it that you did? They would rather write about it as if you had manipulated all of the public.
So they never see you as a cognitive, thinking, planning, intellectual, disciplined person?
Absolutely not. They would rather have the public believe that I came from wherever I came from, working, and this was luck. Well, it isn't luck.
Or soul?
No, and it isn't soul either. And it isn't, I hope, either. It's, I know.
At what point during that period did you meet Camille?
Oh, I met Camille, I guess had to be about 9 months after working in the clubs because I was making big bucks then. I was making about $300 a week.
So she married you for your money?
She knew it, and I told her that, and I want my money back.
You want your $300 back?
Right.
That's why she's chairman of the board.
Please.
Chairman of the board.
Yeah.
Let me ask a question. As your success exploded, the role of Camille in that process meant what to your ability to achieve the status that you now have achieved?
First of all, I think that your mate on the other side has to take that initiative. Because if your mate doesn't have that strength, and I think it comes from protecting me. In other words, Camille would look and see people that she felt were not team players. And she would come to me or begin to get rid of those people herself.
Given the impact that this, what I call these gap experiences have had on you, I mean the mother-father Russell factor and the Navy and the Temple and the Camille factor, in your living out this life on television, do these same values permeate the Huxtables, therefore?
Oh, yes. And they all have to do with education. They have to do with, even and in spite of your own feelings, to try to get a value across of appreciating other people.
Are you kind of reliving the best of your past through the Huxtables?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that part of the neighborhood that I loved. And life can be like that. It doesn't have to be where everything is painful. Once again, I have to go back to the media and what it puts out every day and reinforces that it's painful. Things must be painful. Well, I know pain. And when I was a kid, to have just the heel of the loaf of the bread, and there were 3 of us, and
Call
we
the
had,
hen.
Right. And use sugar and put mayonnaise on it so that, and you say, boy.
Jam
Now,
sandwich, 2 pieces of bread
and jam
so
together.
close together. You get a jam sandwich. And now we will take a break to sell some Jell-O pudding.
We hope.
Yeah. Well, given this basic instability now of the African-American family, the show is often attacked as being unrepresentative or unrealistic. How does that sit with you?
Sits just fine with me because the people who say that obviously are not paying attention to what's going on. To be fair is to just say nothing to them.
Then what is the motivation of those who challenge it as unrealistic?
Blatant racism problems. And I mean that. And I don't use that word that often. But the New York Times has a problem with it. They found some fellow from someplace, and the fellow wrote in his Sunday article that our show was subliminally telling people it was their fault that they were not doing well in life. But there's nothing negative in my mind about that. If you haven't taken advantage of your high school and the opportunity given to educate you, if you haven't put yourself in a position of striving, and if all you've left yourself with is that this is my body and I want a check, and you come to work for somebody and you have no idea of what you're supposed to do and you have no drive and where you're going, you've put yourself in that position.
Well, once you project this image of challenge, of life as it ought to be fundamentally, does that put pressure upon your own family, the children particularly?
Well, no, because you see, when you talk about education, when I talk about education to my children, I'm talking about education. You can become anything you want to become. But with a liberal education, if you have no idea what you want to become, with a liberal education, what have you done? You've read, you've wanted to read, you've wanted to know. That should be the fun part of life, because then you can talk about things. The unfun part of life is constantly fighting against the odds to get an education. You wind up not knowing anything, and so then you have to gather yourself together and go out and do what everybody else wants you to do.
And there are consequences in the choices.
Absolutely.
That is interesting, that when the news broke about one of your daughters having a difficulty with dependency, the parent of you and Camille moved swiftly, not to deny, but to project this term of tough love. I mean, what was the kind of thinking behind the immediacy of it and not denying it, but a recommendation in terms of your own sense of therapy, tough love? I mean, define tough love.
There is no reason. It's two things clearly. My mother didn't write the book, but my mother always had a philosophy, and she graduated from junior high school and then went 2 years high school and then started scrubbing the steps. And my mother said, with your children, you don't turn your back. You don't turn your back two different ways. Number one, you don't turn your back because you love them and they need you. Number two, if you got one that you don't trust, you don't turn your back. Twice. And that's always stayed with both of us. And so with this particular child, it's her behavior. And I said this, and I mean it, that many times a child will have a certain belief about what life has been promised. And they think that their participation in it is giving life all it should get. But they're wrong. Because I am who I am does not deter Erica from becoming an artist with an education. It doesn't deter my son from saying, I want an education and I can be whatever I want to be. And the other two down the line. We have one who decides that I have to be me. Fine.
Me defined as?
Me, whatever mistake I make, that's me. And just don't go back on it. Don't keep telling me about my mistakes. Well, you have to look at her and you say, okay, now how far have you gone so far? All I know is that as a parent, your children will be your children for the rest of your life.
But how did you handle, I mean, given the tremendous credibility that you and Camille have as family and as professionals, was there a sense of embarrassment? How did you handle that?
No. When you love a kid, I mean, that's my kid. It's not the neighborhood. We don't tarnish because of what people think about us. We tarnish if we behave because of what we think our neighbors are going to think. And when you quote Mrs. Cosby, you say, well, if somebody does something against you, that can't be your friend. So who am I trying to impress? If I love my daughter and I want to see her well, it doesn't make any difference what the neighbors think.
How is she responding to both the love and the toughness of you and Camille's response?
I think she's confused, and from that comes anger, and she's still trying to manipulate. But that's the fun of it, because Camille and I know that we're on course.
So when you went through the drama in one of the Huxtable series about Theo and the joint,
absolutely,
in part, your response was a real-life therapy process.
Sure, but you know, on a television show, a comedy, 22 minutes, I don't see how you can have a beginning, middle, and end and solve drugs. You just cannot do it.
Now, what is the Huxtable's agenda? What is the message that keeps coming through? What are you really trying to say?
To make sure that your children have and know that you love them in spite of themselves. To give them your experience in life, to live as well as you can, being happy with yourself.
Thank you. Bill Cosby shared with us some very private and very special moments, some very basic philosophy. Just because you were born in the slum does not mean the slum is born in you. And he did not use it as some basis for doing less than his best. What does it matter if the doors of opportunity swing wide open, if you're too drunk to stagger through the door? So Bill is coming straight at us with some very profound messages. That's how it struck me. I want to know how Bill Cosby's message strikes you.
Reverend Jackson, as you know, I think Bill Cosby is very special, and I believe that Bill has a profound understanding of what love is all about and what that means in dealing with our young people and our children. And I think that's part of the problem of today. Young people don't believe that they're loved.
There is a sense in which this question of tough love and discipline goes to the heart of how shall we address young America now, given the what we call children at risk.
The message I got had to do with your opportunities and taking advantage of them, and that given the opportunities you have, you should always do your best to take advantage of them, even depending on how limited they are.
And so there's no basis for concession, for surrender.
Mm-hmm.
Your hand is up.
My name is Peter Quesada. I'm from East Los Angeles. I was brought up in the barrios, and when I was going to junior high school, there was marijuana sold across the table, and when marijuana was something like a terrible crime that it really ought to be. And the one thing that I heard someone here mention about how difficult it is to be a parent and express your tough love to your child requires something very special, and that be that you must be disciplined yourself and be an example to your child, not just tell your child what to do, but show them through your own behavior and through your own example, because that's how they really will believe you.
So Bill Cosby speaks to us.
Yes, indeed.
We thank Bill Cosby for sharing with us today. Now a break for a commercial. We are a superpower with the most sophisticated arsenal in the history of the whole world. We spend $300 billion a year on military defense. We are at war, but the war is not being fought with some foreign adversary or some foreign foe. Mr. Bush and Mr. Gorbachev are having meetings on the boats in Malta, but we are dying every day. It's not that the Russians are coming, but the dope pushers are coming, and the crack pushers are coming, and they're coming with Uzas and AK-47s. They're killing people, they're killing police, and every night we see on TV the police cars and the blue lights flashing. These are the veterans of the war, but the casualties are our children. Just went to a hospital here in Los Angeles just to see and to hear the voices of our children.
The increase of children who are coming into the child welfare system whose mothers have used drugs prenatally is explosive. We have predictions all the way up to 450,000 children a year nationwide.
Most of our mothers really want their babies. That does not, however, mean that they are capable of taking care of their babies.
Now I am expecting a child. I'm 6 months pregnant and did use crack cocaine during the first 5 months. The only reason I stopped was because I'm in jail now because I got caught.
Most of these women are extremely highly motivated for change at the time of delivery.
I was a drug-addicted baby, and I had to work through a lot of anger. I have a learning disability, TMJ problems. I've had major surgery. I have a heart problem due to her use of drugs and alcohol during the pregnancy. So I see both sides of it, and it's very difficult. We're working on characteristics of the preschool child. I don't think our society can afford to turn its back on these women because we can't afford to keep these children in foster care.
The children who are living with us at this time have either come to us directly from the hospital because their positive toxicology and their withdrawal symptoms were severe, or because mother has gotten up from the birth experience and left, and the baby is truly abandoned at the hospital.
And it's hard for me not to think of these women as human beings who care and are really caught up in a terrible disease And I believe that addiction is a disease.
As we wrestle with this most difficult and challenging problem, a war on drugs, we have with us today 4 experts. First, Dr. Exlina Bean, a doctor at Martin Luther King Jr. Hospital in Los Angeles. Robert Silbering, the Chief Assistant District Attorney of the Special Narcotics Courts for the City of New York. Marion Fussy, an Administrative Assistant to the Vicar of African American Catholics, and the mother of a daughter who is a crack addict. Also, Corinne Castaneda, a former drug addict. She was the mother of 6 children and used drugs while pregnant with 3 of them. Dr. Bean, for the normal term of pregnancy, how much does prenatal care cost for 9 months?
For 9 months, prenatal care may cost, depending on whether you use the private or the public sector, someplace between about $600 and about $1,200.
If it's a premature birth, about how much does that cost per day in the hospital?
Premature baby who is born without major complications, who's in the neonatal intensive care unit, generally will cost any place from $2,000 to $3,000 a day.
If that baby is crack addicted or tests positive on AIDS, about how much will it cost?
Well, it depends upon how long they stay in the hospital, but an average premature baby that's born, say at 7 months, even without any complications except being born premature, will cost about $250,000 for a routine hospital stay.
Does coke or crack induce premature birth?
About someplace in the range of about 20 to 30% of all premature infants that are being born at our institution. And in most of the major institutions, at least in Los Angeles, and from what I can tell, over most of the country now are being born to mothers who use cocaine.
In this one hospital, how many babies do you see a year born in this predicament?
About 600 infants a year.
Mr. Silbering, you are a law enforcement officer. Do you think that crack-addicted babies, that their mothers are criminals?
I don't think that they're criminals, and the courts have said that the use of drugs is not a crime, it's the possession of drugs. But one thing that I think most people in law enforcement have come to realize is that you cannot win the war on drugs simply through cutting or trying to deal with the supply side. We have to deal with the demand side, the urge to take drugs, and the need for people to take drugs.
If the dope is in the fetus in the mother's womb, she's in possession of drugs.
Well, technically you can say she's in possession of drugs, although it would be difficult to prove that, Reverend.
I raise this because drug czar Bennett, his recommendation for solution is to build more jails to handle those who are using drugs. What is your response to that as a law enforcement officer?
Well, we're building jails, and for every dealer we arrest, there's another dealer to take that person's place. For every seizure of drugs we make, there is another seizure of drugs we can make. We need to have prisons to house those people who sell drugs and sell drugs to our children. But we also need to spend billions of dollars on preventive education, on treatment and rehabilitation. And I think any person in the field of law enforcement will tell you that that is the key, dealing with the demand side, because we cannot beat the war on drugs simply from the supply side itself.
Mrs. Foster, how many children do you have?
4 girls.
Are all of them on drugs?
Only one.
Only one.
But she met the wrong crowd and made the wrong decision.
Now that she has met the wrong crowd, she is addicted, how do you relate to her?
With love.
How do you define that?
Well, I did get her into a rehabilitation center. She's a married woman with 3 children. And before her time was out at the rehabilitation center, her husband decided that he couldn't do without her, so he went and got her out. When he went and got her out of there, he kept her home for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then she went back to doing the same thing. And of course, he washed his hands of her. So there she was in the street.
Now, how many of her children are drug impaired?
None of them.
Ms. Castaneda, you've tried drugs, and you have 3 children that were drug impaired during pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel a sense of responsibility for these babies?
I guess you could say a sort of sense, but I didn't live up to that part of the responsibility.
I mean, one might say that one makes a mistake and you had a baby and got pregnant, but then another time, and then another time. I mean, where are the limits in your judgment?
The drugs became so in control that any sense of morality or morals was no longer there.
What happened to break the cycle? I understand for 2.5 years now you've been
Sober.
drug-free, sober, drug-resistant. What happened to break the cycle?
I was tired of seeing my children suffer without me. They would always cry, "Mama, when are you coming home? You know, we need you." And it comes to a place with the mother that you say, "Man, you know, they need you." And that was my breaking point.
So you made up your mind. The breaking point came within you.
Yeah.
It was not a social solution, but a personal conviction.
It was a personal conviction.
When did you start taking drugs?
Heavy drugs when I was 17.
She was a child. A substantial number of people who are into drugs are not children, and they are not poor, and they're not inner city. What shall we do with them who we assume know better?
In this country, there is an insatiable desire for drugs, unlike any other country in the world. And I think the message must get out to everyone at the earliest possible stage, not in high school, not in junior high school, in elementary school, why you can't take drugs. And we must start dealing with that at the earliest level.
You raised a question.
Now the woman on the right, whatever made you to stop using drugs after your third child?
Well, I was 97 pounds, strung out on heroin and cocaine. I did drugs intravenously at the end. I was running the streets of San Gabriel Valley, and I was just really getting tired of being in and out of jail. I had some warrants, and I knew that they were catching up to me. And I know that the Lord had convictions over me, knowing that there was something better, that there was something more to life than just living like this.
Let me ask a question of the audience. How many of you know someone in your age group who is dead because of drugs? Stand. Be seated. You know someone in your school who has tried drugs? Stand. Be seated. You know someone in your school who has sold drugs? Stand. Be seated. Youth, those of you who've tried drugs, raise your hand. Why did you try it?
A way to escape.
What were you escaping?
Daily pressures. I didn't have the coping skills that you know, a person should have at the age, and I began to use drugs, and that was my way of coping.
Coping with what?
Oh, with daily peer pressure, school pressures, home.
I mean, did you really realize that trying drugs, in addition to being a thrill, a short-term thrill, was also killing you?
Yeah, I knew that.
You knew it at the beginning or later?
At the beginning.
And it did not matter?
No.
How shall we respond medically to a crisis of this dimension?
It's not an accident that drugs are a major problem in poor ghetto urban areas. Drugs meet a need, and so doctors are not going to be able to meet that need just by coming up with a different medication and say we have a miracle cure for drug abuse.
Let's take a break and hear the voices. Whenever there's a discussion about drugs, it's always highly charged because so many people are killed. In one city alone, 400 people have died this year already. So it's always attack, arrest, burn up the fields, kill the pushers, arrest the mothers who transmit the drugs, challenge the fathers. And yet through all of the tough talk, the real victims are these children. Whatever one's position may be, these are our children. We cannot arrest them. We cannot abandon them. We must adopt them. They deserve and need our love in a very special way. Today we have with us two very special people who chose to respond and not react. They chose to adopt children and not abandon them. They deserve a very special welcome and round of applause. Black, first name? Torian Black and Camille McGlory. You made the decision to adopt children. That's always a big challenge, but now yours has been compounded by adopting drug-affected or drug-impaired children. What made you make that decision, Camille?
I don't have a mic cord. He tore it off. I'm sorry.
I hope I don't get in trouble with the union doing this because I did it backwards.
I would say it was just the need of the child to look in that incubator and see a small, helpless baby that nobody else wanted.
You were aware of the extra financial costs and time that may very well be involved?
Yes.
Brother Black, in your instance, you have adopted 9 children?
Yes, 9. And
What motivated you to do that?
Well, 2 motivations. Number 1 was God, and second was love. These are my children. I love them. God has blessed me abundantly. Number 1, with my life, with my health, financially, career-wise, spiritually. And it was ridiculous for me not to share or give back because he didn't give me all this just for myself.
How many of you are going to be giving Christmas presents? Raise your hand. It was significant to me that, you know, the Christmas really is not about Santa Claus and jingle bells and giving gifts to buddies. Christmas really is the story of a homeless child. And now, see, the whole point is how shall we respond to homeless children? Will you make this Christmas the consideration of embracing a homeless child? Who will accept that challenge? Please respond.
I am practically homeless myself. Don't have much money, but I try very hard to share with children and with the elderly because I know that they need. And there are so many of us who are so caught up in our own lives that we cannot do for them. We are so busy doing for ourselves.
Are there others of you who are interested in this adoption challenge? We really do have 3 options: abandonment, arrest them, or adopt them. We must not forget, as we celebrate the biggest holiday of the year, Christmas. Really, in fact, Mary and Joseph and Jesus were on Skid Row. They did not have a room in a public or a private house. They made a makeshift adjustment in a stable, in a manger with no floor in it, and no lights and no running water. This whole message of becoming better people, not just bigger people, is what is our challenge. Today we really have a victory I must share with you. These children who were with me at the beginning of this segment, I have captured the hearts of some adults who want to adopt them. And even as we talk now, some people who have come here today, maybe because they were curious, have been cured. Something is happening. They are in the back right now, matching families with children preparing to adopt them. Let's give them a big hand. Let's give them a big hand. We'll be right back with America's #1 adopted child, Sammy Davis Jr. Historically, America has moved forward on the shoulders of volunteers. Rosa Parks volunteered one day. She would not go to the back of the bus. She was a volunteer for justice. Students sat in and marched to make America better. They volunteered for justice. All just the people in our neighborhoods who babysat for us as our mothers and fathers worked, they volunteered. It was a sense of self-determination and respect, not a dependency syndrome, always from your house and my house up, never White House down. There's power in the heart and energy of a good volunteer.
The reward that we get as volunteers is really quite something, because you may think it's a long way to go and it takes a lot of time, but when you arrive at the nursing home and see the expression on these people's faces, it's worth every minute you put into it.
The Salvation Army rented this at the time of the earthquake. I came from Savannah, Georgia. I thought I would be useful, so I'm donating my time. Were those Conservation Corps guys working on the bric-a-brac? Yeah, okay. I need the work just as much as they need my labor. I mean, as far as it gives me a little bit of a purpose.
Do we have some suspicion that we can't prosecute anybody? We
have a lot of corruption and violence, but there is a way out. I looked in the community and I saw the gang violence. I saw crime, I saw drugs, I see a lot of children walking around with no aid. I looked and I said to myself, what can I do to make some positive change in our community?
First we have with us a young man, Waleed Sadruddin, organizing community youth to oppose gangs and drugs. Let's give him a hand. Former governor of Michigan, George Romney, founder of United Way, and now chairman of Volunteer at the National Center. Give him a big hand, you anxious. And Edward James Olmos, not almost, almost, act and volunteer for a variety of causes, bilingual education, anti-drugs, a man of peace and justice. Give him a big hand. Waleed, what challenged you to get involved in this anti-gang activity? Because it's dangerous, and many good volunteers are wiped out in this process.
The main thing that made me see is that seeing in the community the problem and looking at the extent of the problem and thinking to myself, what can I do myself to make some significant change in the problem? What ability that I have to make some changes? And in doing that, I looked out in the community and I thought about what could I do, and I thought to use the club, Brothers Gain Equality Through Excellence, as a vehicle to make some positive changes in the community.
Has your life been threatened in the process?
No, it hasn't. It's actually been very enhanced. A lot of people think, well, the gang members will look at me towards this way, or the drug dealers will look up towards me that way. I have given a lot of respect from the gang members and from the drug dealers, because they know the problem. They are a product of the problem. They put out the problem, but they know what the problem is, and they know that they don't have really other many means to suffice themselves as far as they need money, what have you. They know what the problem is.
You have special skill and courage. George Romney, what are you doing now as one of the fathers of volunteerism in the country?
Well, you know, the money part of volunteerism is better organized than the people part. As you indicated, I helped organize United Way, and everybody knows about United Way, and that's a great thing, and it ought to be made as strong as it can be made. But on the other hand, the volunteer part isn't as well organized, and I'm trying to correct that balance. Because if we're going to solve our social problems in this country, we're going to have to become more involved as people, helping each other.
Almost at this point, where you think volunteerism ought to be focused on in a measure?
Boy, I'd have to start at the very beginning, and that would have to be in education. I'd have to say that volunteerism has to start with the example. I think all of us, and you included, are setting examples. And I have told my own children, you have told your children, you've told your children, you could talk to them till you're blue in the face, and it'll go in one ear and out the other until they see the examples working. They'll either have to burn themselves, or they will look at someone that has burned themselves, or they will look at someone that didn't burn themselves, and why.
Who else is about some action? Yes.
I just want to say I'm 16 years old and I'm a junior in high school, and I just want to tell all the teenagers here, and I congratulate you. If you're a teenager, you're not exempt from helping too. You can still be a volunteer. It's not just the adults. In fact, I think it's almost more important for teenagers to get involved because we can speak to kids on their level and we can talk to, we can help younger children. It's not just adults coming in and looking down on us and telling us what to do. I think everyone can get involved, especially kids, and you can never say, I can't do anything.
You will do a special round of applause. Action. Almost, what project are you involved in now?
At the present time, we're bringing awareness on the drunk driving problems and the seatbelt problems in America. And also, we've done so much, Jesse. We work
George,
with,
you are 81 years old.
82.
82. And you are still driven. What drives you on your present project, and what is it?
Well, I concluded that this aspect of our society needs strengthening more than any other, more than government and more than the economic system. And if we don't get at these problems through our willingness to involve ourselves at these social problems, we're going to continue to decline in our ability to compete. I've spent most of my life in the automobile business. We used to spend more money trying to make streets safe than any other single thing. Along comes a woman, Candy Leitner, who has a twin daughter killed by a drunk driver. She says, I'm going to do something about that. She organizes Mothers Against Drunk Driving. That's done more to reduce traffic fatalities than any single thing that's happened in my lifetime.
Someone had a question of the panelists.
My name is Marguerite Lamont. I'm an ex-school principal, and it's great to see this young, clean-cut man sitting on the stage here today. So often we see the gangbangers and the negative side of our youth. And here's a young man who's doing something positive. We are always looking for programs to assist our children, and we hear nothing about this. So can we hear some more about this program so that we can replicate it and duplicate it across the country to help other children who need it?
Well, you're on. What can people do to help you?
Just as far as supporting mentally and physically by their works, the club is founded by youth, sponsored by youth, and promoted by youth. Because you see that there is problems, and there are problems that we can solve as well as the adults can solve them. There are many problems that lie within our own selves that we should be able to solve. If we create the problem, we should be able to find some solution or some pathway into solving that problem.
Somehow, the spirit of volunteerism has to be driven by something independent of, I might get some help, because you are the help. I mean, in a real sense, Rosa Parks never got that help from the government. But by the power of her volunteering, she helped the government itself and the whole nation to see the light. And I am convinced that the very opposite of dependency on help that's not forthcoming is the internal drive for you as one person to make a difference.